All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Guys, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited for today's guest. Chia-Ming is a Los Angeles-based garden consultant, creator, driven to help clients foster an appreciation for growing their own food, increasing their family's food security, and a focus on regenerative farming practices, which you know I love. What started as a childhood gardening hobby has blossomed into a career and movement. Chia-Ming has transformed her own home into a developing urban homestead by trading concrete and lawn for raised beds for edible and pollinator gardens. She is also currently working with her city's environmental committee to legalize beekeeping to save the honeybee population and increase pollination for homegrown crops. And Chia-Ming, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so excited to have this chat.
Oh my goodness. I have been loving everything you're putting out on Instagram. You're really making it seem like home gardening is easy. So I want to get there, but let's start with, what is the Coastal Homestead and how did you get started in this world of edible gardening?
Yeah, so back in July of 2020, I know we don't want to go there, but let's go there for a minute. That's just a few months of quarantine. We were all waiting in lines. There was no food on the shelf, and we were stuck at home. So what I did was, I thought, I'm just going to scrap my front lawn because it's really small. I didn't want to pay $60 a month for a guy to mow and blow. And I put raised beds in and I started growing food. Well, quickly, I started realizing all my neighbors would stop by asking what I was doing and wondering why. So I would tell them why. And they wanted to grow food too. So they would come by every time I was there. They would stop and ask me what I was doing, how I was doing. And then I realized, oh, this is a great way to connect with people in a time where we are so disconnected. All we can do is hop on the phone or on a Zoom. We can't do this face to face. But if we're outside, we can. And if we're distanced, we can still talk. So that is kind of where the light bulb went off in my head, that other people need this and I know how to do it. So I did it.
Wow. What was your background before gardening?
So I'm a finance director by trade, I guess you could call it. And my formal education is in accounting and finance. And I have an MBA in entrepreneurship from SC. So
right on.
Exactly. Fight on. So yeah, I always knew I wanted to do my own thing, but what was that thing? And I dabbled in baby products. I invented one and I, did that, but those are all very stage driven. And now my kids are 6 and 8 almost. And I don't really want to go to the baby shows because that's not where I am, you know? And right now, but with gardening and food, that's something that's going to keep going. And I can really motivate and inspire other people to grow food. And I just feel like, I think I read your books too. And I want it to make it so it's not a separate thing. Like you have to memorize the rules and, you know, that type of stuff. I think a lot of people look at the back of a seed packet and think, oh my gosh, I need to do it like 10 inches. It can't be 9. It can't be 12. Like they have to follow all these strict rules and then they give up. So I think it's very similar in that aspect to what you were writing. And it really spoke to me.
Oh, awesome. I love that. You know, I'm a huge fan of light structure and feeling like you can do it yourself intuitively, but you have like some bumpers on your bowling lane. So if someone wants to get started, where do we start? Do we need raised beds? Can we put it in a planter? Like, what are some easy veggies to start with or herbs?
So herbs are kind of like a gateway plant almost, right? Because I think mint is one of the easiest because mint, I know in some of your recipes, you're like, drop in a couple leaves, right? So if you had that plant right there, if it's on your windowsill, inside, on your counter, or even if you had a pot of it outside, you could just grab a couple leaves. And so mint is kind of one of those really challenging to kill and you can ignore it and it will just keep coming back. You could put it in teas. If you have a cocktail, mocktail, whichever, you put it in there or a full-on recipe. So I think that's one of like the easiest. If you want to go into like vegetables, root veggies like radishes, you do them from seed. All you need is like a patch of dirt and the germination and everything from seed to the root. You can have that within 2 months. I think today, and you probably experience this too, is we want that instant gratification and waiting is not our strong suit these days, right? We've been so accustomed, like Amazon drops stuff off within 2 days. Well, that doesn't work in gardening, right? So I think if you do it with mint, if you start with like a radish, those are easy and you don't need a raised bed. What I try to tell people is I know you want the beautiful raised bed, the whole thing, but if you don't know how to garden or if you aren't ready for that investment, then let's just talk about how to start simply. So I love that question. One other super easy, if you don't have a yard or if you're not quite sure where to start, microgreens, because all you need is like a little tray. You can buy the kits or you can just get a clamshell or a plate, sprinkle some seeds, put in some water and wait. And then you'll just start seeing them grow. And I know you put them in your recipes, sprinkle them on top of stuff. They're expensive, but you could do that very easily at home.
Yeah, definitely. There's a company called Hum Mama, I think it is. And they do microgreen kits where you can just buy it looks like a piece of cardboard that you just drop in water and they pop out. But that's the kind of stuff where it's easy. So I'm curious because I'm obviously I think I'm more of a black thumb than a green thumb. And I definitely want to get excited about growing more of my own food. I think where I feel overwhelmed is I would want to like find clean seeds. I'd want to know what kind of fertilizer to get. If I need fertilizer, if I'm composting, how am I adding that to my like soil? Can you start from scratch? If you were to work with a client, what does it look like? How do you assess their home or their apartment and make suggestions for where they start? And then where can we start to acquire the right like tools and seeds and support so that we have the healthiest produce?
Yeah. So that is a lot.
Yeah.
Why it's so easy to get overwhelmed. And with me, it starts with the conversation, very similar to this. It would be, okay, what are your favorite things to eat? I like to start there because I'm not going to teach you how to grow, I don't know, let's say carrots. If you just don't like them, there's no point for you to learn that. And then I will teach you things like how to get away from the packet, how to get away from a book and use intuitive gardening a little bit. Because, and I think you talk about this in your book too, it's if you stay in the moment, just give yourself a moment and think about how you feel, you can understand if you're hungry or what you need, thirsty, things like that, right? It's the same thing for a plant. And when you're gardening, if it's a hot day, you walk outside, oh, maybe I should water a little, top it off a little because I'm hot. I know that I can see it, right? Just being present. And so I actually just last night wrote out the structure of a mentor program because I've noticed there's this need in those exact questions that you just asked. And so I'm hoping to launch it soon, but I'm thinking, for 3 months, we're gonna nail this down, the basics. And I'm gonna teach you how to pick the best spot because the sun actually moves. There's a app called the Sun Seeker that you can put in your address and it'll tell you how the sun moves throughout the year. So it might be a great spot for one time of the year, but maybe not great for something else. So it's really just matching the plant and its requirements. And it sounds like a lot but there are tricks. And that's why I have lots of conversations and we teach you to think about it that way. You asked about
like where you source.
Where I source.
Yes. Sometimes are covered in chemicals and GMO and stuff like that.
Yes. So luckily there are a lot of companies now who are very pro non-GMO, organic. And the best thing to do is to search your local seed businesses and make sure that they do have those certifications. Because when you grow something locally, aside from carbon footprint and, when you source locally, the seeds are acclimated to your climate. So if we're going to pick a seed that was German or grown and the plant was grown out in an area where it's snowing, and then in Southern California, we don't have that. That plant has different makeup in some ways. So it's better. Like down here, we have San Diego Seed Company. That's a pretty local company that has really great seeds there. And in terms of your seedlings, I actually try to recommend starting with seedlings because when you're brand new to gardening, it's just like having a newborn, which I know you have. Going from newborn to toddler, there's a lot that's going on. It's a little bit crazy. It's a lot to tend sometimes. But when you're going from toddler to like a 3 or 4 year old, it's a little bit easier and it's a bit more like, I don't know.
You can keep them alive.
You can, yes.
You're not worried about keeping them alive. Yeah.
Yes. And so, I recommend, unless it's like a root vegetable, if you're going to disturb the roots, you want to start with seeds like carrots and radishes and things like that. But everything else, if you start with the seedling from your local nursery, that is probably going to be a little easier of a lift for you starting out. And the instant gratification, right? The amount of time between seed to seedling, you've just paid for the nursery to do for you. So you just go seedling to harvest. So it just shortens the window a little bit.
That's great. No, I didn't realize that you could buy seedlings at a nursery. And that seems like, kind of like training wheels to getting going. Cause you're like, okay, it's out of the ground and now I can watch it grow and flower. Yes. and like, yes, something for me.
Exactly.
I love that. When I think about what we go through the most in our house, probably everyone knows this. My husband's obsessed with tacos and Mexican food, SoCal, born and raised. So it's like romaine lettuce, it's cilantro, it's tomatoes, and those aren't, I don't think, very difficult to grow. So I feel like I should be doing it. Can they all kind of go in the same bed? Is there a specific way to make sure? Because I know you said you don't want to follow the rules, like how far the seed goes in and how separated the plants are, but we want to be successful. Are there any like hard and fast rules for growing the food that you do love and eat the most?
Yes. And that's why I try to teach this, what I'm dubbing it as intuitive gardening, because the basic is, if you're going to eat the fruit off of the plant, so that's the tomato, the eggplant, the cucumber, whether it's classified technically as a vegetable or a fruit, ignore that for a minute.
Okay.
If you're eating if you're plucking it off to eat, then that's going to need 6 to 8 plus hours of sun.
Okay.
If you're going to eat the leaf, so let's say the lettuce or the collard green or something like that, the bigger the leaf, the more sun they're going to need. And so you're talking like 4 to 6 hours.
Okay.
So if you break it down like that, you're like, okay, let me think about this plant. What part am I eating? How big is the thing that I'm eating? Like if you're doing cherry tomatoes versus a large beefsteak tomato, that makes a slight difference too. So it's like that.
The bigger the fruit, the more the sun.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so when I set up a raised bed, you might have seen some of my photos. It's pretty crammed in there because I practice intensive gardening, because where we live in like Southern California, I'm in El Segundo, right by LAX. I don't have farmland. I don't have a lot of space, but I do need to grow food. And because the goal for my clients and myself is to harvest continuously. So the plants aren't going to get to full size at the top. In the root system, they may, but that's a different conversation. So there's going to be enough space. And I try to teach it like, let's talk about when you're going to have a family dinner, when we can have big family dinners again, right? If you have more people, more food on the table. And the same thing with the plants in the raised bed. If you're going to put a lot of plants in there, then you want to make sure that you're feeding it more frequently. So I think when I started out gardening, I just thought I'd put the plant in the dirt and then that's it. It does its thing. But because we are trying to garden and grow the plants and we want them to produce, we actually need to amend that soil and feed them. It's like putting a kid to a table and not putting the food onto the table.
Yeah.
Oh, and just like a baby to a toddler, they eat different things. So thinking of it like that, I think simplifies it quite a bit.
Yes, I love analogies like that. That really does help. So you mentioned intensive farming. So how, is that going against the rules of the separation of the plants and it still works?
Yes.
So we aren't going to mess it up is what you're saying.
No. And so our goal is going to be small production for our family. Now, if we're going to start an urban farm, then I would tell you, you can still plant intensively, but you might want to do a little bit less. So for example, when you talk about romaine, right? So when you buy it from the store, a full head is, fairly large. But when you take that structure, you're actually cutting it at the root and then the plant is done. That is the entire plant. It's at maturity. That's it. But when you're growing in a home garden, you don't have to wait till maturity. You can actually peel off just like from the head, when you take out only the outside, that's what you're doing at home as it's growing. And as long as you don't take the center or cut out the root, it's going to keep growing and keep producing for you until it reaches that stage in life where it's done.
Wow. So that's amazing. So that kind of was another question that I had, because you do go, we go to the Ecology Center here in Southern California, and I love that place. It's a beautiful little, neighborhood farm, and they have a farm stand and it's so fun to go. But that's how we buy our romaine. Obviously, we're buying it completely cut off. It's a huge full head and we'll eat it. So that's kind of what I'm curious about is I wouldn't want to do all that work to get one head of lettuce.
No.
It seems like a waste of time. As you're pulling the leaves, how long on average does that head of lettuce or romaine last? Could you pull back 8 leaves, and then how long would we have to wait before 8 leaves grew back?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So let's say we had a raised bed, and I would put maybe 4 to 6 romaine lettuces in there. So then you can get the full amount each time. So you would take maybe 3 to 4 leaves off of each one. And then by the next week or the next couple days, you'd be able to go get another few leaves off of each one. So you're not taxing one plant. Does that make sense?
I love that. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You're just trimming back a couple from each
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
And how does it work with like herbs? Would you put all the herbs in like in little pots or like one little raised bed? And is it the same idea where you're just like cutting off a few leaves and they're growing? Do they ever kind of like, I want to say go dormant or die and you have to start over? Is that?
So it all depends on where you live. So in Southern California, we're technically zone 10B and we can grow year round. So I try not to talk too much about it with everyone in social because then you have like the rest of the world or the rest of the states under snow and they can't grow. So for us, we have like technically like eggplant, for example. I know we're talking herbs, but if we took eggplant and peppers, for example, most people think that they only grow during the summer, which isn't actually true. They can grow year round in our climate. They're actually perennials. So same thing for herbs. Like when you go to the store and you buy that $4 pack and you only get through some of it, it kills me.
Oh, it's the worst. So wasteful.
Yeah. So wasteful. You can actually buy a full plant / seedling for that much or less. If it's organic, it's probably about that much. You put it in a pot and you just take what you need and let it grow and it will just keep going. Most of the herbs are annuals. I do tell people that basil is a bit of a diva. It's Goldilocks. Doesn't like it too hot, doesn't like it too cold. But otherwise, everything else is pretty hardy for herbs. You don't have to put it in a raised bed. You can do it in a pot. The only thing that, because we're talking about container, kind of what do we put it in?
Yeah.
When you're thinking about it, a pot is, I don't know, not that large. And the amount of water that goes in there, it will evaporate faster and the temperature will heat up faster than if it was in a large raised bed or in the ground, right? So it depends on how much you want to monitor and pay attention to it. I tend to do raised beds and just throw it all in there because I find that it's a bit more stable in terms of watering and, there's less fluctuation versus like in a small pot.
That makes perfect sense. I wouldn't have thought of that. And so I would have probably been like, I'll just put them in a pot because that's prettier or it's, I don't take up as much space, but it makes more sense that I would want to have a raised bed just because if it gives me more flexibility to not mess it up, then I'm down for it. You mentioned a few things like perennials and annuals. Can you kind of break down what is a perennial plant? What are the different types of plants? And how would someone, no matter where they live, figure out when to plant something? Are there like apps that you love or websites that you love, stuff like that?
So I would say if you're talking about like fruit trees, I know we're really expanding it now.
Yeah.
Dave Wilson, they are an orchard and they produce a lot of bare root trees. Like right now it's bare root season. So the best thing to do is actually they break it down quite a bit, what variety they carry and also what regions they do well in. But the best thing to do if you're just starting out is literally Google it. Put in your city, put in growing zone, then you're going to find out what zone you're in. I'm in 10B. So it's going to break down my lows and my highs temperature wise. And that is a good place to start. We can go down a major rabbit hole, but I'll leave it with, even in LA, right? You can go from the mountains to the beach and the valley, and the temperatures can range 20 degrees the same day, the same time. So those are what we call microclimates, right? And that can affect what and how you can grow things. I live by the beach, so I never get really above 85, but things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, they love the heat. So I have to look for varieties that are more hardy and okay with cooler temperatures of those things. So when you talk about annuals, those are going to be your leafy greens, like lettuces, and so leafy greens tend to be a winter crop. So as we get warmer, they will bolt, and that means they're doing their maturity and like, okay, I'm coming into the world. I've done my purpose and I'm going to seed now. And then I die. That's kind of the circle. But there are some greens like collards. They can keep going. Tree collards, you can grow tree collards. I've seen tree collards that are 5 years old and they are, a story high. It's pretty crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think.
So if you were to plant leafy greens, for example, like, I don't know, let's say you planted like green leaf, red leaf, spring. I don't know if they call it, if they just call it that in the grocery store or if they actually call it that in the gardening world too. Okay. So let's say we planted some salad, because you guys know I love leafy greens. We plant all our leafy greens on average. Like, when would you plant those? And would you plant those as seedlings or seeds?
So for someone starting out, I would say start with seedlings, and you plant those in, I think for where we are, you could probably even start them, I would say in the fall, because during summer, it's too hot for those. Yeah. Unless you have a shady spot or a part sun spot, you might be able to hack it. Yeah. But that's like, you probably want me to hold your hand through that type of a thing. Yeah. But if it's on your own, start with the seedling. Now, here's the trick. You also want a pack of seeds, because what's going to happen is as those seedlings grow, you want to then maybe 3 weeks later, sow some seeds, because then the seeds are going to pop up as your seedlings mature. So then you're always going to have more, right? So that's called succession sowing. And that way, as you've eaten and as the plant matures, you have your backup ready to go, because things happen in the garden. If a squirrel comes, or if you had slugs for some reason, because nature happens, I call it nature's tax, right? Mm-hmm. You plant extra. So if it does happen, it's okay. You still have your stuff to eat.
I love that. You're just making sure you always have constant supply just in case something happens. And it's called succession sowing, when you have seedlings and then seeds. And you said 3 weeks later, you'd plant those seeds.
For lettuce. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. And so when let's say the end of that seed and the end of those leafy greens life, and they're dying, and that you said that then they let their seeds go, right? Yes. So do you collect all of the seeds from your previous plants, and how do you? So
I don't normally, just because to do it correctly, you do have to wait for the plant to completely, they're done flowering, they've seeded, the seed pods are on there. You have to wait for it to dry. Then you have to harvest it, shake out the seeds, and hold on to them until the next season.
Oh, I see. But they're already taking up space in your bed and you want to grow something else.
Yes.
I got it. I'm already ahead of the game here. Okay.
Yes. There you go. And seed packs are anywhere between $2 to $3 to $6 if it's organic, non-GMO, depending on what it is you're buying. So I feel like the amount of time, it's not really worth it for me personally, because I just don't have that space.
I don't think it'd be worth it for anyone. Time is money. You think about all the food you could be growing to feed your family. You're making up for that 10 times or more by the food that you're growing by just putting new stuff in your bed.
Yeah. So the only caveat to that is if you grew something that was absolutely amazing and you know that you want it for next year, then that's worth saving, right? So I right now have these green tomatoes that at maturity, they're this greenish yellow heirloom. And I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's a Russian name. It's Malakatovaya. Mm-hmm. And they're organic heirloom. They're the best tasting tomato I've had. You slice it, I put in on top balsamic glaze, and just eat it like that, chilled. It's amazing. And they do really well in my climate. I have tomatoes right now when normally you don't have winter tomatoes. So
That's awesome.
I might break my own like rules, and because I can't buy those seeds now because they don't offer it anymore.
Yeah.
That's when you would want to save seeds.
I love it. Okay. So I just want to, because I like structure. I like understanding like the big picture. So you have perennials, and perennials mean these are plants like your fruit trees that grow and flower and you don't pull them out.
Not just fruit trees, but like, yes, plants that you're going to, it goes through the seasons. It has its own seasons, but it's more than one season life.
Okay. So you said peppers and eggplants are also perennials. So you just have those plants up and sometimes they're giving you fruit and sometimes they're not.
Yes. So for those, for example, in our climate, they're classified as, they can be perennial. Now, right now they look pretty bare, but what you do is they're in their dormant phase and you cut them down, you prune them back pretty hard. And as it warms up, the little leaves sprout out. And so then it's going to be ready for spring and summer. And the reason why it's good to we call it overwinter. So it's like, we're going to put them to bed a little bit and let them hibernate for lack of better words.
Yeah.
And when they're ready to wake up in spring, they already have their roots established from last year. Whereas if you go buy a seedling or a start from seed, it's all brand new and you got to start over. So overwintering sometimes, especially if it's a variety that you do like, then definitely try.
I love that. Kind of reminds me of my mother-in-law's roses.
Yes,
like,
it's very much.
They're just little sticks, and then all of a sudden, she has a beautiful rose garden. So you have your perennials, and then you have your annuals, which are all the leafy greens. Is there any other classification of like fruits or veggies that you would grow?
I mean, that's kind of the main thing is like, are they seasonal or are they going to go year round? But the other things that I'm trying to think, I don't think we would classify them, not for like a home gardener.
Okay.
You definitely call them by their Latin names, things like that. But I think that just gets confusing. But I'm excited to grow cucumbers this year because I have like a big arch trellis. I did it last year and I think they were 2 foot long, like Japanese cucumbers that were just really crisp. And there's just something about growing it in your garden, picking it, walking inside within like 5-10 minutes and you're eating it. There's nothing fresher. And you know what goes into it. I know you're big on non-GMO and pesticides to make sure it's not near your food. And really the only way to ensure that is growing it yourself.
Definitely. So you just touched on a topic that I want to discuss today is what have you been growing in the last year and what are some of the practices you're ensuring to make sure that nature doesn't take its tax, as you say?
Yes. So for me, what did I grow this past year? So cucumbers was a favorite. My tomatoes, I actually had I had old seed packets that were like 4 years old. And I thought, okay, these aren't going to really germinate. I'm just going to plant them all because they're 4 years old. They all came up. I had 250 tomato seedlings out of 5 packets. And I'm giving it away to my neighbors, which is something else about gardening that I love is that you share your bounty. So what else did I grow? Oh, I have passion fruit vines in my backyard, which I absolutely love. It took over my entire back property line, which is not very big, but it just went bonkers, climbed over everything. I trimmed it back 3 times, but that is something that you can't really buy in the grocery store. That's kind of how I started gardening on my own when I became an adult. I knew how from learning from my mom, but when I got to choose what we were growing, it was all about what was expensive or hard to get at the grocery store. And so in my backyard, I actually have your basics, like your lemon tree, your lime tree, and orange tree. But my background, I'm Taiwanese and I have a wax apple tree. And so it's one of like my favorite fruits. My husband thinks it tastes like styrofoam, but it has like a spongy but crisp texture and it's shaped like a bell. It's pink and it's like a very light, fragrant, sweet taste. And you can't really buy that out here. Like you have to know someone with a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I know someone with a tree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I go to a lot of the nurseries around just to see who has what. And I found one in LA called Mimosa Nursery, and they have these tropical trees. I wish I had more space. I only have a 5,000 square foot lot with majority of it as concrete. So I want a star fruit tree, a mango tree, like a lychee tree, sugar apple tree, like all these things. And I'm holding off because I'm trying to wait. It's so hard. Even for me, as someone who's been gardening for a while, you go in and you want it all.
Yeah. Start with what you eat. That's what you said. So that's what we're going to do.
Exactly.
I love it. So let's get to nature's tax and regenerative farming and making sure that you're not using pesticides and chemicals. How are you keeping those pesky little guys away in your home garden? And what are you doing?
So I actually haven't seen too many. I think the only pest I have seen is a squirrel. And he's like, I think someone in our neighborhood is feeding it peanuts because I find peanuts randomly in the soil as I'm, gardening. And it doesn't really bother me because we're cohabitating with nature and we have to respect that. So I don't have an issue right now. I also do have an outdoor cat, so I think he helps.
Yeah.
And the basic stuff that you can do is create a physical barrier, right? So you can put a fence, you can put like a screen, something like that, because otherwise they're going to come in or you're going to have to spray or something. And I think the physical barrier is probably the safest for everybody. And let's see, as for pests like caterpillars and cabbage worms and then like scary hornworms, I have mixed feelings about it, right? I don't want to decimate my entire garden, but at the same time, those little caterpillars are babies. They're the moth babies, the butterfly babies. So if we were to spray, even if it's organic, we're disrupting that life cycle. And so I try to pick off as many as I can, and I wish them good luck into my greens bin that goes away each week. Or sometimes I let it sit there and it's got plenty of stuff in there to eat. So I say, okay, here, you eat that. I'm going to eat my stuff. The other thing is and I didn't do this on purpose. I was kind of spraying with organic. You can use neem oil or BT is what they call it to kind of get the caterpillar infestations under control. And they're deemed organic. However, you do disrupt that cycle. So what happened was I saw caterpillars, but I saw good caterpillars, as in like the butterflies that we love. And so I kind of left it. But then I realized there was no good window to spray because there was always something living in my garden that I didn't want to disrupt that cycle. And what was really crazy is one day I saw a wasp eating a caterpillar. And so it was literally just chomping from the head all the way to the end, just holding on to it. And it was so fascinating. I couldn't even be disgusted, but nature took care of itself if we just leave it alone. So sometimes I know that I've plucked out some of the caterpillars and left it out in the middle of the yard and birds have come to eat them. And if I'm not spraying, even if it's organic, I know it's supposed to be okay. It's probably better if there isn't anything on it, right? So I just leave it out and nature takes care of it.
And you're just okay with a couple holes in your leaves and it's no big deal, right?
Exactly. Like there's a hole in a leaf to me is less bad than, let's say, a substance on it that didn't need to be there, whether it's organic or not. So
I love that. So how do you, we want what we grow in our soil is based on the nutrition and the microbiome of our soil. So how are you feeding your soil? How are you protecting your soil? I
love that question because I'm still with gardening, and why I love it so much is there's so much to learn. Even as someone who's been gardening her whole life, there's just more and more and more, right? And you'll probably like this part, but the biology of it, right? That soil is not a dead thing. It's a living organism in a way, right? And so there's this, I'm diving into it now. So I'm not as well spoken about it, but it's called biodynamic soil and compost. And it's like a whole niche area within gardening that I think is up and coming. And because I don't know enough, I defer to others who do. And one brand of compost, because I cannot produce enough compost to feed my entire crop of what I grow. You need a lot. And it's called Malibu Compost is the brand. And they rescue cows from dairy farms and they farm compost. So they take the manure, then they let it decompose and they're tilling it and they're, nurturing it to get all the good macrobiotics and there's all the sciencey biology that you need to get it to be a healthy soil to support your plants. So I kind of cheat. I buy the bag.
That's great. Most of us, if we're listening and we're not a home gardener, we're going to need to buy the bag too. I know a lot of people don't even know what to put in their compost and how to store it and what bin to use. And I know that Vitamix came out with a composter for like your kitchen counter, but it's literally like, it's the size of like a Vitamix carafe, So if you're growing a lot, I know that's not going to work.
No. And the thing is, what comes out of your kitchen is most likely going to be what we call green waste. But when you compost properly, you need a balance of green and browns, which is like your dead stuff. And if you have all the stuff that comes out of your kitchen and not enough of the brown waste, it's not going to be balanced and you're going to end up with like really gross stuff. So I think, yes, it is sludge. And I've done it. It's not fun. So composting, although once you get it right, it's beautiful. But until then, it's trial and error of what comes out of your home and how much time do you really have to dedicate to that. So for those who want to dive into composting, like my sister, she's like, oh, I got it. She lives in an apartment. And she's like, oh, I want a composting for my apartment. And her friend got her one. And it's one of those little tin things that you collect. That's not a composter. That is to collect your scraps to take to the composting. Because she doesn't know. So she thought, oh, I just put it in here. It's going to compost. No, you have to take it outside. You need to let everything break it down. You're basically taking dead things and bringing it back to life. And so with that, there's some very unpleasant looking things. But if it's done correctly, it shouldn't smell bad. If it smells rotten, something's gone wrong. So if you're wanting to compost for sustainability or to support your footprint on it, and you want to minimize your footprint, I would recommend putting it into the green bin and sending it off to let the city handle versus at home. Because to do it traditionally, composting, you need a big space. You need to go and you need to turn it. You have to aerate it. You have to water it. And not everyone wants to go do that with, it's basically waste or trash. It's not the best name for it because it does come back around, that whole cycle thing. So I do think if you do have a yard, something that I've found this past year is called a sub pod. And they do use plastic for the construction of the bin, but it's like BPA free and it's safe. So if you're okay with safe plastics, it's basically a worm bin that goes into the beds or into the ground. And you can, in it, what I love about it is that it gives a list on one side of the inside of the lid that tells you what can go in and what can't go in. Because a lot of bins out there, it's just the bin. And to memorize everything of what can and can't go in is overwhelming, right? Gardening itself is overwhelming. Then you have to do composting. It's like mind blown. So, but once this thing's in the ground, the worms come, or you can put worms in yourself, and then it churns and it goes faster. So we could go way deep into composting. So I've tried almost all of it, but that's like the easy way for me.
Well, we'll link the Malibu compost that you use in the notes, and we'll link the worm bin that you're using with the instructions. Okay. I think most of the time people just want to do what you're doing, which is, for me, like getting started is knowing, okay, now I'm going to probably do a raised bed instead of a pot. And I'm going to plant 6 romaine heads so that I can pull a few leaves off and see that continue to grow. And then, maybe when I think about the citrus that we use the most, it would be lemons and limes. Is there a way to or a place to get what my father-in-law would call the vodka tree in the backyard somewhere, I love that idea of meeting people where they are and with what they use the most. I think that is probably the most sensible thing I've ever heard people say about gardening, because it is overwhelming to think okay, well, where am I? What grows here seasonally? But making that third question, what do we like? That speaks to my soul. So okay. I love that so much. Well, I would love to dip a little bit into what you're doing with bees and how we can, protect our bee communities. And I know you're looking to legalize beekeeping, which is super cool. I guess I didn't realize it was illegal. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it was all by accident. Basically, in March of last year, we were just new in quarantine. My traditional compost bin was back there. We were home. I opened it and there were bees inside. They had moved into my compost bin and there was 4 blades of honeycomb. And it was crazy. So we went from, okay, who do we call to humanely rescue these bees and hopefully take them to a sanctuary? There are people who do that. To what if we just keep bees? What about, because I know that no matter how much we put into the ground, if we don't have bees to pollinate the flowers, we're not going to get the fruit. Unless you sit there and pollinate every single flower with a paintbrush. That's not happening, right? So, yeah.
I didn't even realize that was possible.
So if nature, so whether it's bees, bats, butterflies, if they're not the ones, or sometimes it's critters too, if they're not pollinating for you, then you need to go and do it, or you're not going to get crop. So,
can you explain what pollination is and pollinating?
Yes. I probably don't know all the scientific words off the top of my head, but basically it's taking the pollen from one flower and transferring it to another. So then it's fertilized. So it's very much like how to make babies.
I see. Okay. Great.
Yeah. So it feels very weird when you have to take the pollen from one flower using a paintbrush and taking that, paintbrush laden pollen. With pollen and go tickle the other one. It feels very weird. So it's like you're artificially inseminating, but
your plants. I see. Yes. Okay, great. Yes. Perfect. I know that people are like, okay, I understand what she's saying, but now I don't get it. So I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So without the bees, you're going to have to help artificially inseminate if you want to be successful and have stuff to eat. Like lettuce don't need pollination, right? To eat it. But then for anything like tomatoes, eggplant, passion fruit, like all of those things, you need it. You need an assist. So back to the bees. So they moved in, and when overnight, my husband and I are like, let's try it, because I have so much growing, like for peach trees, for nectarines, things like that. It's way better to have the bees do the work and you support the wildlife. So I thought, okay, we'll get a hive. Ordered the hive, got the hive. Within about 2 months, we learned through talking to neighbors now that in the city that we live in, there is a city ordinance that says you can't have bees. In the county of LA, it's allowed. In the state of California, it's allowed. And I don't know any of these like political structures, but that's how I learned about them, is it goes from the state down to the county, and then your city gets final say on something like the bees. So there's an ordinance that says there's no beekeeping allowed, but you can have chickens. So we dove really deep into the legislation, and we were like, look, we can either illegally keep these bees or we can let them go and try to change legislation. And so that's basically what we decided, because we were afraid of the legality of what happens, because your homeowner's insurance will not cover it if you're illegally keeping bees, right? So we weren't gonna go down that route just in case. And so anyway, we had someone come. We were very sad. We let the bees go. We still have the hive, and I'm still hoping to get it set up for this year. And so I started working with the environmental committee to talk about how do we even get this legislation in front of the city to get them to approve. We are, I think, hopefully in April, we're going to be able to get it in front of them, finalized. It's taken almost a full year, which is still pretty fast in this world. But yeah, I've attended meetings. I am not well-versed in anything government. And I ended up presenting to the city council my proposal of asking the city to look into legalizing beekeeping. And I was like, okay, cool. The mayor's on there. No big deal. Then I realized that he's actually moderating, and I was presenting to the mayor and the entire city council, basically the city officials of my city, and I didn't know. But yeah, it was definitely very interesting. But
good for you. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, think about it.
It's probably good I didn't know, actually, because I probably just take myself out.
Food security, though, think about what you're doing for your community. Like we are in, I mean, just obviously a worldwide pandemic, but people have been strapped financially for over a year, and it is just overwhelming. And like you said, like people going to I remember going to the grocery store back in March and April and being like, this feels like a horrible movie. Like there's nothing on the shelves. People were hoarding, like what an amazing way to like get outside and get your vitamin D, to like support your immunity, to be able to like say hi to your neighbors. I mean, the fact that you're in your front yard and they're walking by and you're able to have some kind of masked up like conversation, or from 6 feet away, be able to just connect with human beings. Like this is more than just providing food for your family. It's so much more.
Yeah, it totally was. And the other thing when I started embarking on this beekeeping journey was I realized I wasn't going to go to the city and be like, hey, little old me, one person, one resident wants to grow to raise bees. So I polled the area, like the city, we have a bunch of Facebook groups. I'm sure everybody does. And so I said, hey, is anybody else interested? And it was an overwhelmingly good response, where I had people who are anaphylactic allergic to bees were like, I'm anaphylactic, but I want you to have bees because we need them. And so if in this time frame, if we look back into like May and June of 2020, June was pretty ugly politically and everything. Like we had no idea what was going on, right? And we were so kind of like pulled apart. And everybody was like there's so much fear. But I realized something that people fear, bees, like there's quite a bit out there where people are really scared about bees. Even the people who were scared were like, nope, we need them. So I saw that bringing bees, backyard beekeeping into our city would actually unify people and like have another common thing to talk about. And I think we're really far from being human. And so doing that, I think connecting with nature, it all brings it back together. So
I love that.
Yeah, we're not trying to do like a full apiary. You can only have 1 or 2 hives. Like there are rules around it. So it's not like we're going to be like a city full of bees or anything.
Right. It wouldn't become an infestation or anything like that.
No. Okay. And but that's part of why I wanted to legalize it, because then there are rules and there's support and there's education around why bees are so great and important to support human beings, right? So
absolutely. So I love this because what I'm picturing is like your house in El Segundo with a couple of fruit trees, some raised beds in the front yard, hopefully fingers crossed, a little beehive next year or this year. Can we talk about, for people who have a small space, maybe a couple of tips before we close out today's podcast around space saving ideas? Because you told me earlier in the show that cucumbers can be grown over a trellis. And I'm thinking in my head, like, that's great. That's a perfect example of something that I wouldn't have to have like 5 huge raised beds just to start, but maybe could grow some of my favorite things. Cucumbers are one of my favorite foods by far. So fresh in salads, as like a vehicle for any fat dip, I'm on board. Other than cucumbers over a trellis, or can you kind of walk us through like how would you help a plant grow in that way? And what other space saving ideas do you have?
So anything vertical is great. I'm actually about to build something. I haven't done it yet, but I want to have a raised bed with the back post all the way up. And then I can connect them, and I want to hook like trays of strawberries. So if you can imagine that, then it's like, if you have a raised bed, all the space above it, you can still use it. You just have to put in some structure. So it could be posts. It could be stakes, like anything sticks that you have around, and just support it so it grows up. Because I think in an urban environment, we don't have space for these large cucumbers to sprawl across, because my kids run all over the place. I also have a big, giant 100-pound lab. Kind of trample over anything. So I love growing vertically. My trellis is actually a hog wire, cattle panel. And so it's literally what cattle farmers use to keep cows in. So it's very sturdy, and it's like 14 feet. You bend it in half and you stake it down, and it's very inexpensive. The panel itself is only $25, and it's a huge trellis. And then the stakes are like $4 each, and you only need 4, and you zip tie them. So for $30, $40, you have it in materials. However, because we are in an urban environment, you have to go to, like, I think it's like the tractor company out in Santa Cruz, like where there's actually cows, where people actually need this stuff, right? You're not going to find it in downtown LA. So I actually had to pay someone to bring it to me, because I don't have a truck to bring a 14-foot panel. So it's, there are so many ways around it. Another way, and I won't go too deep into it, is hydroponic gardening. And that's like a whole different thing. But hydroponics done well, done right, you can grow a lot in that one vertical space. So it is a very different type of gardening, because you aren't dealing with soil. And so what I try to say is, if you are ever going to deviate from a pot of soil, or let me step back. If you're ever going to deviate from a plant in the ground and its natural environment, then you're going to have to think about what you have to replace to replicate that. So for example, if you're going to go into hydro, you don't have all the nutrients, all the beneficial things in that soil. So you're going to have to buy it or put it into that water. to support that life. So that's kind of the thinking, the intuition that I'm trying to teach.
Yeah, I love that. I've always thought about that when I see those hydroponic towers or like the things that people like bring into their homes that look like something from the Jetsons, where they're like just growing leafy greens out of little white cups, and it goes all the way up to their, to the ceiling in their house. And they're like, I can grow it in the house under fluorescent lighting. And I'm like, this doesn't seem right to me. Like this seems like Band-Aid, and I would much rather like support the microbiome of the ground, roots that go deep, that can be there for years. Like that's what I'm on board for. And I think like, okay, no big deal if you do like a plant or two that way, but I'd much rather learn to get my hands dirty. And you've given me such a taste of what I need to do. Now I need to have you come down here and help me.
Yeah. No, I try to tell everyone, and like when you first started out, when we started talking, you said you think you have a black thumb. Every single client or every inquiry, that is like the one thing they tell me. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because guess what? Before industrialization, before all of this stuff, every single one of us, I mean, I don't have scientific proof, but I'm pretty sure if we think about it intuitively, we're all related to someone who grew their food, because where did food come from, right? Those plants don't need us. We just figured out what plants we could eat, trial and error, right? And here we are. So that's what I try to tell people. Like it's in our blood, it's in our DNA. We just have to get back there.
Definitely. Well, I just, gosh, I can't tell you how many times I work with clients or even just see it personally in my own family. We buy a lot of the same things. We might as well be getting out there and growing those things and then getting creative when we feel confident.
Yeah.
I love it.
Comes quickly.
Oh my gosh, this was amazing. I'm so excited. I feel like I have so much more to learn, but I think it was a great primer for anyone looking to do some home gardening, some urban gardening, even if they just grab a pot and some herbs, that works too. But why don't you tell everyone where they can follow along and what you offer personally to support people?
Yeah, great. So I'm most active on Instagram because
you're such a fun follow too.
Oh, thank you. It's so much work to do the content. And it's like, I can't be on all platforms. So right now it's Instagram. It's at coastal_homestead. And so I put out a lot of content to hopefully inspire people to realize like, it's not that hard. And I want them to just start somewhere. You don't have to do the full gardening setup. But in terms of offering, I think the best thing is just to DM me, send me an email, hello@coastalhomestead.com. And I also have a website, again, www.coastalhomestead.com. But it's just to reach out to me because I do everything from garden design to installation. And also, I'm just, like I said, launching a mentor program because I think there's a lot of people who want to start, but just aren't confident to do it themselves. And so I want to really mentor these people. So then when you are ready and you have that confidence, then let's go do the amazing, beautiful garden, right? And then I also realized that sometimes they just need a chat and a call to ensure that they're on the right path and they don't want the full mentoring. So I will also have 30-minute virtual calls that can be scheduled. So.
I love that. Well, you're giving people a shot at being their own gardener and giving people food security. And I appreciate it so much. I know this episode will be so much fun and people will definitely get something out of it. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. I love chatting about this stuff. So
awesome.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.